all that we're seeing take place, autonomous vehicles, new distribution of energy, the shift of production, urban farming, all this is changing how cities may operate. And you're going to see a lot more emphasis on cities as more self-contained and supplying nearly everything they need. That's not everything. So for instance, Paris is now talking about the 15-minute neighborhood. Well, the idea is that you can have education, a job, your home, your culture, your entertainment, all within 15 minutes of walking or bicycling. So design is beginning to match up with technology. Technology can deliver production close by, 3D printing, automation, urban farming. And then that changes how you lay out your city and how you design your city. And the goal is a better quality of life for people, not necessarily more income, but a life that feels fulfilled and complete. So think about parks and think about Bilbao and how they used architecture and design to attract the world to them and give their citizens a better life. That's the opportunity. And India, because it is the growth democracy, is right at the point where we all hope, certainly we in the United States, hope that we can team with India as the two leading democracies in the world. And we'll join Europe into that because Europe's become very democratic. And those countries, we demonstrate what it means to be a democracy, what it means to have moral fiber, what it means to have leadership. This is a great opportunity, and I'm pleased to be part of it, and I look forward to this discussion.
Great. Thank you so much, Jerry. I see that Shailesh has also joined us. I'm not sure if Shailesh, your connection is stable, but if it is, and if you're able to join the conversation, I will invite you to introduce yourself very quickly and maybe spend 5 minutes on talking about your work, but also about global perspectives and its relevance to India in the context of this conference.
Thank you, Rishda, and for the terrible internet connection. I hope my voice is transmitting. So I happen to be a past president of the Indian Merchants Chamber, and our flagship event. Extremely delighted to first welcome all of you and to just give you a global perspective. It might be interesting for you to know that the IMC had taken up an entire set of thoughts and ideas to revamp the city. And we had called it the Mumbai Development Project. And we had covered almost every facet of it. And to bring it to today's modern day time, it's very interesting to note that some of the things that I was mentioning and Xavier mentioned earlier would all go into that revised, up-to-date Mumbai plan. So what do we need? First, need to make sure that we get all the global resources to make sure that our rising sea levels will not start. And therefore, there is a need for us to look at what all can keep the city protected from rising sea levels. And many thoughts and ideas have been given, including a revamping of the topography, which will allow that water to go away. And there's a full-fledged plan which is being worked on by the city in the United States to bring this to reality. We do need to get the congestion on our streets completely reduced and switch very to EVs, and therefore that is another part of Mumbai's redevelopment. We do have Uber here, and we need to get that into a more responsive, simply reducing the traffic, and that's something that Mumbai is very much working on. The big opportunity, though, in India is in energy transition. We are very, very clear, in particularly Mumbai, can rapidly transition to renewables, particularly solar. So rooftop solar, financing of rooftop is becoming a very critical, big opportunity. There are companies in India which have put that up to actually put all of this to, but there is a huge global opportunity to switch on a micro basis to renewable power in a city like Mumbai. And that will become of concept and the movement forward. But the biggest thing happening in Mumbai is we have the largest infrastructure project being implemented here. If you put together coastal road and you add to that the metro rail network, which is getting expanded. So we are waiting for Mumbai to transition to public transport in a big way, reduce the vehicular traffic and the need for the number of vehicles, move them to EV, get the coastline protected, change the topography, make sure that we transition our energy mix. And all of this can certainly be a big opportunity for global majors.
Great.
I'll just mention one last thing and stop. Clean hydro is that India has put its hands up, and in the latest budget, India has created a clean hydrogen establishment using solar power to perform the electrolysis, which will separate the hydrogen from oxygen, and putting up storage tanks, which will permit us to go into microgrids and the transition from big global grid across to make sure that we can have bursts of this clean power, which can be used for energy in our vehicles. So that's the big holy grail new picture that we are waiting to see happen. So we are working on all of these areas. ESG has become a watchword in India in a big way. 1,000 company mandate report on ESG. And so there's a whole lot of excitement in infra investment, in energy transition, in transforming to EVs, Uberization, and making sure that the city remains protected. So welcome to you again, and I'm delighted to have all of you on this panel. Thank you so much, Rishta. Go ahead.
Thank you so much, Shailesh, for this really in-depth perspective on the opportunities that are exist and are opening up in India. So we will come back to you with a few questions, time permitting. I did want to pass on to Mr. John Deaton, the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce, who has been able to join us now. John, if I may just ask you to quickly introduce yourself and maybe spend the next 5 minutes to talk about your work and how it links to this session on global perspectives and India in general. So welcome, any thoughts, and then we will go into next set of
Well,
discussions.
first of all, thank you and apologies for the delay. I'm actually traveling, which is an odd thing to do in the middle of a pandemic. So I've traveled from Paris to Rome, and tomorrow I go from Rome to Madrid and then back to Paris. And I'm doing that partly because even though we all like to believe that we can operate completely digitally, there are just some discussions you need to have, and you can only have them effectively face to face. So getting that balance right will be very important moving forward. So I am the Secretary General of the International Chamber of Commerce. I'm based in Paris. The International Chamber of Commerce, as some of you will know, is an institution of more than 100 years. Not a trade association. We're not a business association. We are an institution, and we represent the real economy in global policy circles. We create frameworks for policy. We create standards where governments can't act, we can act, and we actually create tools. We're actually the embodiment of an effective global international organization. And we are that because we are an institution. We are purpose-led. We are not member-driven. We are purpose-led. Our purpose is pretty bold, but it's to enable business worldwide to secure peace, prosperity, and opportunity for all. And we deliver that by what we do is make business work for everyone, every day, everywhere. And when we think about what we do, we work to grow the global economy, revitalize global trade, and ensure we do so sustainably. These are the three key things that we do. And when we think about global perspectives at the moment, I kind of told my story about travel because the actual need we have on a globalized world to interconnect with each other is on the one hand facilitated digitally, but on the other hand is actually impeded by the barriers that have been put up in our way. The barriers in some cases obviously relevant to preserve and enhance global health. But our view has always been that the preservation of global health also requires a balance with the preservation of livelihoods. And since March last year, we have been running the argument, creating standards, intervening in global policy global policy in order to, one, protect the health of citizens and protect their livelihoods. Most visibly, we do that when I said we're the voice of the real economy, by the work we're doing to protect and actually enable SMEs to continue to function. If you look at some of the global value chains that have been destroyed during the course of COVID, the easiest, which we saw quickly before the actual pandemic's health effects had reached, was in the garment value chain, where we saw, even before the health issues to do with the pandemic reached Bangladesh, in South Asia, we saw the devastation wrought upon the employment prospects, but also the sub-businesses which relied upon that global value chain. And that's all because shops had closed their doors because of lockdowns in New York City and elsewhere. That whole value chain was turned upside down. At the moment, we're in the midst of another attempt to resuscitate global value chain around travel and tourism. Another one which has been destroyed, and we've seen the impact on lives and livelihoods there, with up to almost 190 million jobs lost, the majority of which are women's jobs. More than a third are the jobs of young people. So not only do we destroy the livelihoods there, but we exacerbate inequality at the same time. So the ICC, our role in that is to restore both those value chains, to create policy environments which are more conducive to that. So we've done that through what is known as the ICC Save Our SME campaign. But we do it practically by intervening with the IMF because of our standing with the World Bank, at the G20, at the OECD, in regional multilateral development banks, in APEC, in SARC where it's appropriate. So we do it in all those areas to help governments realize that this was a real economy hit, not a financial services hit, and that the toolbook or the playbook they needed to use was one to do and support to SMEs as quickly as possible. But as you know, a number of developing economies and middle-income economies don't have the fiscal headroom to provide the same kind of support that developed economies could. And so we then had to work with the IMF to try and find new ways of getting access to financing to support that, work with regional development banks, and actually work with governments to actually help them understand that there are new forms of actually distribution of cash which are available using payment platforms, etc. So we've done all those sorts of things. And in the midst of global mobility, we've tried to shift the debate just on travel to you need to have a test. We know that vaccines are critical, but we also know that vaccine distribution will be unequal and will be not synchronous, will be asynchronous, which means that we can't wait until the whole world is vaccinated and before we can open up economies. So we need to use a mix of tools to enable safe places to emerge. And so we've even created a tool, AOK Pass, which we've made available for the many, not the few. We're actually using it between Karachi and Abu Dhabi. We launched yesterday between the French Outremer and Paris, with Air France, and I'm in Rome today because we've launched that, and it operates between Fiumicino and JFK. And we're involved in the discussions now with the European Union about how to create a digital passport, which will actually enable people to have their vaccine attestation recognized and even their testing recognized so that you can use that. So these are all the things we do. Now, as regards to India, I am surrounded by Indians, let me tell you. So my immediate past chair is Mr. Mittal, and so the founder of Airtel. My current chair is Sunil Baji Mittal. My current chair is Ajay Banga, who is the president and CEO of MasterCard. And as I say, I am surrounded by Indians at the leadership level. We have on our board Harsh Pani, who's one of the great industrialists from India, and we have a number of Indians who are part of the ICC family over many, many years. But importantly for us, we also have a very powerful ICC secretariat that operates out of New Delhi. And I don't know whether the Secretary General Imran Khan can join the call today because I think he had a personal issue. But we are well supported there, and we intervene with FICCI, with the Indian government, on issues to do with digitalization of trade, on issues to do with whether or not India should join the RCEP, all these sorts of areas. Plus, because we also have our own courts, the world's leading independent arbitration courts, the ICC Courts of Arbitration. We welcome any number, and we have any number of Indian legal participants and practitioners as well. So I hope that tells the story a little bit about the ICC, and I hope it gives you some of the global context that we operate within and we actually seek to shape. And maybe a little later on in the conversation, I can identify some of the other areas we're working on, which will have relevance to this particular discussion. And of course, I'm nothing but in awe at the capacity of India to continue to generate the kind of new ideas that would be necessary to help ensure that we have the balance between saving lives and livelihoods.
Great. Thank you so much, John, for that. That was wonderful and great to hear about the work that you do and the work that you're planning to do in your long relationship with India. If I may, I would like to take the next 5 minutes to talk a little bit about the Bernard Van Leer Foundation and the work we do, and then quickly get into a few questions that I have for the panelists before we wrap the session. So we have about 15 more minutes. And I'm hoping that we have enough time to ask a few questions of all of us. But briefly, I have already introduced myself. My name is Rizla Majid. I work for the Bernard Van Leer Foundation, heading their work in India. I wanted to focus my own discussion on 3 or 4 core questions of who we are, why we focus on the work on early childhood, which is the work that we do, and why we are investing in cities in India from an early childhood lens. And this may seem a little different in terms of the focus of this particular convening. So I wanted to answer that question as well of why early childhood, if you will, which is a very specific area of work, is relevant to not only Indian cities, but to the participants of this convening. So first of all, we are an independent foundation that's based in the Netherlands and working around the world. We have been working in India since 1992, so for almost 3 decades. Our mission is a good start for all children. And we believe that giving all children a good start in life is not only the right thing to do, but also the best way to build a happy, healthy, and prosperous society. And the reason we focus only on early childhood, we are one of the oldest foundations that have been focused on young children, is because there is a growing body of evidence. There is a lot of evidence that suggests that investments made during the first 1,000 days are critical and foundational for the holistic well-being of children. The brain, as many of us know, develops at its most rapid pace during the first 1,000 days. And about 1 million neural connections are formed per second. And if we're talking about the context of India and translating into different outcomes on health, education, and prosperity, all of these can be linked to early childhood. There is research, for instance, by the Nobel laureate James Heckman that shows that every dollar spent in cost-benefit terms on early childhood program yields a return of $7 to $10 in the long term. But what is the link between early childhood and our cities? For children to have healthy brain development, it requires that babies and toddlers are able to focus on nurturing care, opportunities to learn, but also a safe and healthy urban environment. And therefore, Urban 95 is our strategy at the Bernard Van Leer Foundation to work with cities to incorporate an early childhood lens into the planning and management of cities. And if we were to understand Urban 95 from the perspective of young children, we would invite you to sit down on your knees and think about the question. If you could experience the city from a perspective of 95 centimeters, which is the average height of a healthy 3-year-old child by WHO standards, what would you do differently? And our main assumption is that children are best indicators of a successful city, and therefore focusing on them is one of the most efficient ways to build healthy environments for everyone. Now, smart mobility, sustainable infrastructure, green technologies, which are the focus of this conference, must therefore also incorporate the lens of young children and their families, as these technologies and these ways of thinking also work to improve the quality of life of children of city residents. For India, this is particularly important because in India, about the city population is growing. We have some of the largest cities by population, and this is expected to double to 600 million by 2030. We are looking at a huge population of young children in cities. And how does it link to healthy childhood development? Let's take one example of mobility, sustainable mobility, the focus of this conference. Mobility rarely incorporates the needs of young children and their caregivers. Children under 3 cannot walk fast or always travel with a caregiver, and therefore walking and public transit services is nearly always often poor quality, unsafe, or even non-existent because we don't consider them in city design, which is also the point that Xavier, you mentioned in terms of the work that you do in the cities. We believe that equipping decision makers and practitioners to invest in smart mobility and sustainable mobility, such as public transit, buses, stations, walking infrastructure, will lead to improvement for young children and their caregivers. It's also a public good. The other piece that I think also, Jerry, you touched upon, which was very much this concept of a 15-minute neighborhood. In India, we have a partnership with the Ministry of Housing and Urban Affairs, the Smart Cities Mission and WRI India, on a ministry initiative which is called the Nurturing Neighborhoods Challenge to support healthier, safer, and more inclusive neighborhoods, with this whole idea of neighborhoods having enough for young children and their families so that they don't have to travel far. And also, of course, what works for young children and their families also works for everyone. Why is all of this relevant from an investment? We hope that in the medium to long-term outcomes address the needs of a healthy, inclusive city, meaning that we're looking at a healthy city with less pollution, cleaner public spaces, resilience to climate change, a competitive city with more tourism, opportunities, investments, a diverse city with people using streets, and therefore a safer city and enhanced community ownership. And in cities in India, including those in Maharashtra, Pune is one of our champion cities. They are now fully immersed in this discussion about the future with an eye to young children and their families and the quality of life. And we invite all of you and everybody who has joined this particular session to ensure that young children remain a core part of this conversation. So I just wanted to briefly mention about the work that we do. And going back to the discussion from specific panelists, if I may ask Jerry, you mentioned a lot about artificial intelligence and automation and how that is also going to change some of the ways in which we think about even cities and neighborhoods in India. And I wanted to get some perspective from you on how, what are some of the ways in which global exchanges and learning opportunities can be created. Of course, you mentioned India and US and opportunities there to be able to explore this particular aspect further. Jerry, maybe you're on mute. I'm not sure.
There I am. Thank you, Rushda. Hey, I'll give you one example of how we see children in the design of cities relating. We did a study that showed that mothers will not let their children walk to school if the distance is over a mile, and if traffic on the road beside where the children are walking is greater than 35 miles an hour. So here's a design issue that relates right to the question of whether children can walk to school or whether the mother must invest, let's say, or a father, 20 to 30 minutes every day walking their child to school. So Helsinki has a project called Save an Hour a Day, and they're using technology to save an hour a day of wasted time. So it may be waiting for a bus, it may be getting caught in congestion, as Shailesh talked about, it may be fixing dinner, but there's all kinds of ways in which we could use technology and are using technology to reduce wasted time and allow a mother and father to spend more time with their children, to enjoy life and not be caught so often in these wasted efforts. That's why 15-minute city is so appealing. So one thing that's going on, and John talked about how we're sort of moving the supply chain and what's changing in the economy. I think as we come out of COVID, we obviously will return to a more flying around the world, more global supply chains, but it won't be the same. We've seen China focusing more internally on its economy, the United States focusing more internally on its economy. We are going to see a shift of some manufacturing back to closer. For instance, there's a company that for many years operated in India with 350 employees. They moved their production back to Georgia, one of the states in the US, used automation, and had 7 employees. Same amount of goods. So India loses 350 jobs. The US only gains 7 jobs, not very productive for jobs, but the company succeeds. This shift is a powerful shift, and one that India, I've argued, really needs to pay attention to. If you look at Malaysia, Malaysia worked on an industrial 4.0 strategy because they knew they no longer would be cheap labor, inexpensive labor, competing in the world. They had to compete with brain power, with automation, with 3D printing, all that we've talked about. The other big force I think we're seeing, and this will relate to the congestion that Shailesh talked about, is we're realizing you can do at least half of your job from home. Maybe not all your job. Sometimes you need to be at the office, be with each other. But I don't think we'll see in the United States a return to 5 days a week, travel into the inner city, waste 2 hours a day on transportation to sit around in an office and do what you could do at home. And that's going to be a powerful force. It could be a good force in India to reduce congestion, to allow parents to be with their children more often. But it's going to take some pretty good technology and some pretty good design to make that all work.
Thank you, Jerry. Thank you very much. And you talked about design. We have about 8 minutes, so I just wanted to quickly get in one question for the rest of the panelists. I want to you, Xavier, in terms of design. Of course, Bilbao has had great success with design. We also talked about the 15-minute neighborhood. We've also talked about young children and their families and what cities can do from that lens. And I wanted for you to maybe give us a few, maybe 2 or 3 concrete examples of what how we can think about from your own experience of cities and quality of life of residents and so on.
Yes, thank you, Rusa. Yes, because you mentioned Jerry too and Shailesh, that for me, before the technology is the design. Because let's think about and about the 15-minute city. Bilbao is a good example because of the morphology of the city, what we call the proximity city, or the yes, we could call proximity city. So you can reach everything by walking. So it's the best way of mobility. No? And this is all about the design of the cities and the neighborhoods. And India, you know, there are so big cities that have expanded so much, And let's think about two concepts we like to distinguish that sometimes they confuse. That is mobility and accessibility. So when somebody moves to a city, you move to a city to have this accessibility for a job, to study, to shop, cultural things. And in this proximity city, you have all this accessible. When the city start growing so much, the concept of mobility came. You need the mobility because the city is not accessible. So, for example, let's think about these business parks in the outskirts of the city, or these shopping centers, shopping malls. So you are shifting the work in one part, you are shifting the leisure and shopping in another part of the city. So you are creating the need of mobility. So it's just many times the technology then is to help, but you have to rethink on how to redesign the city again, saying,
Great.
okay, there's no sense in putting one thing in other corner and try to do that. No? And if you visit Bilbao, for example, is a great example of that. You can work in the office and you can shop. You can do everything walking distance. No?
Great. Thank you so much, Xavier, for that. And we would love to visit Bilbao and some of our own cities to learn from that experience. I quickly wanted to take one question that came in the chat from Kumresh Sharma, which was a question for me actually. Is early childhood care applicable only to cities and not for rural areas? In my opinion, it is more important for rural areas in developing countries. Absolutely agree. Urban 95 is just one initiative that we work with. The reason being that a lot of populations are gravitating towards cities, and there will be a need in cities, and there is already a need in cities. However, 100% agree with you, Kumresh, that early childhood development, of course, is required everywhere, not even thinking of the urban-rural divide. And we do work very closely with governments and governments themselves in terms of delivering programs that cater to the brain development and healthy overall development of young children. So thank you for posing that question. If I may quickly go to
Rishta,
yes, Jerry.
if I could just add a bit, I agree with you, and we're working on a project in India on smart villages because we agree not everyone wants to move to a city, and certainly cities need to have alternatives. And technology, I think, is going to be a great cause of villages being able to be smarter. And it's education, it's water, it's energy, and it's ultimately quality of life. And it could be a delightful way to make India, which has, it's a large place, has lots of opportunity to make its villages smart.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Jerry, for that comment. Shailesh, I don't know if you're on because your screen is frozen. Okay, so then I will we have about 3 more minutes remaining for this panel. And John, if I may come back to you and ask you to offer a few closing remarks for this panel from the International Chamber of Commerce and any other comments that you would like to add.
Well, maybe I'll be very quick. Now, friends, be very, very blunt. I am an Australian. You can't have smart cities if they're run on paper. And one of the issues here is that we do have to help the world and help citizens move from paper to digital. There is no doubt if you're an SME and we can move all your accounting arrangements, your trade finance arrangements to digital, we could lower your cost by 30%. So we collectively need to encourage governments to realize that you cannot have a global 21st century trading world which is built on analog. We actually need to move it into the digital world, and that is exactly what we want to do, and that is something that we would like all the participants in this call to get on board with us. There's the tools available, and we applaud the Indian government for actually recognizing the legal validity of electronic bills of lading, but don't stop there. Don't stop there. Only 1% of documentation is actually digitalized. to actually support the operations of commerce. Join with us in the International Chamber of Commerce's Digital Standards Initiative, our campaign to digitize more than 5 million SMEs, and let's get on with it.
So
Great.
if
I
I
think
could
Jerry
add to
wanted to
that,
comment.
but my closing comment would be, I agreed entirely with John about what can be done with government, and we're doing a lot of that, and I did a lot of that in the Pentagon. I'd like to talk about another place you can really change the world, which is to create a standard for investment that is related to environment, sustainability, and governance, all these issues we've been talking about, that allows investors around the world to target their investments to companies that deliver on what John talked about and what we've been all talking about. This is if you can move the marketplace so that money talks and changes the world, that's an enormous force, because then small companies, entrepreneurs, everyone begins to feel more enabled by the fact that money wants to do good things. But we do need a better standard for what ESG, environmental sustainability governance, means. And we're working on that. But that's an important change, would really change India.
Great. Thank you so much for that comment, Jerry. I see that we are already out of time. I don't know, Xavier, if you had one final comment. Otherwise, I will just close the session.
No, yeah, just basically, as you say, that you are when we can travel normally, you are more than invited to come. We will organize like a study tour in Bilbao for you all, and we would be happy to show around. Okay.
Perfect.
Thank you very
so
much
much.
for inviting.
Perfect. Thank you so much. Thank you again, Jerry and John and Xavier and Shailesh, for joining us in this discussion. A lot was discussed, all the way from artificial intelligence to the quality of life in neighborhoods and young children. And of course, I encourage folks who have more questions to reach out to the organizers. But thank you for a very interesting and stimulating discussion. And we will look forward to continuing to engage you in various ways. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Good job, Rushda.
To our friends in India.
Bye-bye. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you for your valuable time. And I would also like to thank our wonderful panelists for all your insights and views. Ladies and gentlemen, it has been a wonderful day with you all, a fruitful day, in fact. And also, I would like to tell you that now we are moving on to our last session for the day. And we have the most important topic, that is rebooting economy. Ladies and gentlemen, challenges are the most important factor in our life that defines success or a failure. And this year, pandemic has been one of the toughest challenge for all of us.